The silence inside the restaurant was not natural. It was the kind of silence rich people pay for. Soft music played in the background. Crystal glasses touched gently. Waiters moved quietly, like shadows trained to disappear. No one laughed loudly. No one spoke too much. Even the air felt expensive. At a corner table near the tall window sat Jin-woo. He was alone. He wore a dark charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His posture was straight. His hands rested calmly on the table. His face looked peaceful, almost cold, but inside he felt tired, very tired. The table across from him was empty. It was supposed to be a blind date, but it was not real. His men had arranged everything. They had also arranged for the woman not to come. This dinner was only an alibi. In Jin-woo's world, appearances mattered. He was a powerful man, a dangerous man. He controlled businesses, money, and secrets. People feared him. Some respected him. Many obeyed him. But tonight, he had to look normal. And for him, pretending to be normal was the hardest role of all. He looked around the restaurant. Couples were sitting together, leaning closer, smiling softly, talking about small things. He understood their language, but he no longer spoke it. His life had become a fortress. Strong walls, no doors, no light. Then his eyes stopped moving. Across the room, he saw her. She was sitting alone. She wore a deep purple dress. Simple, elegant, not flashy. She was beautiful, but not in the loud way some women tried to be. Her beauty was quiet, calm, real. She looked at her watch. Her lips tightened for just a second. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Jean noticed. He always noticed small things. He had seen that expression before, disappointment. He had seen it on enemies who lost deals, on partners who failed him, even once many years ago, in his own reflection. But on her, it looked different. It was not angry. It was not bitter. It was tired, like she had expected this, like she had already prepared herself for being let down. And for some reason, that hurt him. He kept watching. She lifted her glass of water and took a small sip. Outside the window, city lights blurred in the night. She stared at them quietly. Jean felt something strange in his chest. Curiosity, real curiosity, not about profit, not about power, about her. Who was she? Why was she alone? Why did she look so strong and yet so tired? For the first time in years, he was not thinking like a businessman. He was thinking like a man. Across the room, Laura gently smoothed her purple dress. She had bought it 2 days ago. It was expensive for her. Too expensive, but she wanted tonight to feel special. She was not just Leo's mom tonight. She was Laura, a woman, going on a date. Or at least that was the plan. She looked at her silver watch again. It had been a gift from her mother long ago. 1 hour. He was 1 hour late. A familiar ache formed in her chest. She had arranged everything carefully. Called the babysitter. Cooked dinner early for Leo. Chosen this dress after trying on 3 others. Allowed herself to hope. And now that hope felt foolish. She was not crying. She was used to disappointment. Life as a single mother had taught her strength. But still, it hurt. Being alone in a restaurant full of couples. Feeling like everyone could see her empty chair. Then she felt it. Someone was watching her. She lifted her head, and their eyes met. The man across the room. He was very still. Too still. Like the world moved around him, not with him. He was handsome. Sharp features. Dark eyes. Expensive suit. But he was not looking at her with pity. Not with desire. Not with judgment. He was studying her. Carefully. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Why was a man like that looking at her? He looked powerful. Like the staff feared him. Like he belonged to a different world. Yet he was alone too. For a brief moment, she forgot about her missing date. There was something strange between them. A silent connection. 2 lonely tables. 2 people pretending not to care. The waiter started walking toward her table. She knew what he would say. "Will your companion be joining you, madam?" She prepared her polite smile. But before the waiter reached her, a shadow appeared beside her table. She looked up. It was him. He had moved so quietly she didn't notice. He gave the waiter a small nod. The waiter stopped immediately. then walked away, without a word. The man looked at her. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched. Gene felt a war inside himself. Every instinct told him to go back to his table, to stay invisible, to protect himself. But something about her quiet strength had broken through his armor. He was not used to acting on emotion. Yet here he was. Finally he spoke. His voice was low and calm. "It seems we are in the same situation." Laura blinked. Her heart beat faster. She gave a small, tired smile. "Your blind date didn't show up either?" There was humor in her voice. Gentle humor. Gene was surprised. He expected suspicion. Maybe fear. Not this. A soft smile touched his lips. "It appears not," he replied. He gestured to the empty chair. "May I join you? So the evening isn't wasted for both of us." Laura hesitated. This man was powerful, intimidating, different, but in his eyes she saw something familiar. Loneliness. Deep loneliness. She nodded. "Please." He sat down, and something shifted. Their dinner was quiet. They did not ask too many questions. They talked about the food, the music, the city, safe things. But the silence between them was not awkward. It felt comfortable. Gene was used to conversations being battles. Every word a move. But with her, there was no game. She listened, really listened. She did not try to impress him. She did not flirt too hard. She was simply present. For Laura, it felt strange, too. His watch probably cost more than her car. But he treated the waiter respectfully. He never interrupted her. He seemed careful, controlled, but gentle. She found that interesting. For the first time in years, she felt calm during a date. No pressure, no pretending. Just two people talking quietly. The meal ended softly. He paid the bill with a simple motion. No show, no drama. They stood outside the restaurant. The night air was cool. "I should go home," Laura said softly. "My son Leo will be waiting." The way she said his name changed her entire face. Warmth, love, protection. Gene's heart tightened. Leo. He knew that name. He had seen it last week. One of his foundations supported young artists. He remembered reviewing a file. A boy named Leo. Single mother. Incredible talent. A drawing of the city skyline full of color and imagination. It had impressed him. He had approved it personally. And now, this was his mother. The world felt strange. Connected. Not random. He looked at her differently now. This woman was stronger than she knew. "Allow me to drive you home," he said calmly. "The city can be unpredictable at night." She studied his face. There was no hidden intention, only concern. She nodded. The drive was quiet, but it was not empty. It felt safe. The city lights passed by. Gene glanced at her profile in the streetlight glow. He felt something painful inside his chest. His fortress was cracking. He had built his life on control, on fear, on distance. But she had walked through those walls without even trying. She looked peaceful beside him. Not afraid, not impressed, just calm. When they reached her apartment building, he stepped out and walked her to the door. It was a modest building. Clean, simple, real. On her door, taped at child's height, was a crayon drawing of a smiling sun, bright and messy, full of joy. He recognized the style immediately. Leo, his heart clenched. This simple drawing felt more valuable than anything he owned. "Thank you," Laura whispered. "You saved my evening." He looked at her carefully. "You saved mine, too." He said her name softly for the first time. "Laura." The sound felt right. They stood there for a moment, close, but not touching. Finally, he stepped back. "Good night." He walked away. Laura leaned against her door, heart racing. Inside, Leo was sleeping peacefully. She kissed his forehead, but her mind was somewhere else. Downstairs, Gene sat in his car, looking up at apartment 3B. He picked up his phone. "The scholarship for Leo," he said quietly. "Approve it. Fully funded. Anonymous. No trace." He ended the call. For the first time in years, he had done something purely good. Not for power, not for strategy, but for them. And he knew this was only the beginning. A week passed. Life returned to its normal rhythm for Laura. Mornings were busy. She woke up early, packed Leo's lunch, checked his homework, and hurried him out the door before catching the bus to work. But something inside her had changed. She found herself thinking about Gene, about the way he listened, about the quiet way he said her name, about the strange peace she felt in his presence. She told herself it was nothing, just a nice evening, just two lonely people sharing dinner. But deep down, she hoped she would see him again. 3 days later, a large envelope arrived in the mail. It looked official. Laura frowned. Her first thought was bills, or paperwork, or something she had forgotten to pay. Her hands felt slightly cold as she opened it. Inside was a letter. She read the first line, then the second. Her breathing stopped. It was from the city's most respected youth art program. The letter said that an anonymous benefactor had created a full scholarship for talented children, and Leo had been chosen. Full tuition, art supplies, mentorship, museum visits, everything covered. Laura had to sit down. The letter shook in her hands. For years she had worried. Leo's talent was obvious. Even his teachers said so. But talent needed support. Classes were expensive. Supplies were expensive. And she could barely cover rent and groceries. Now, someone had removed that burden completely. Tears filled her eyes. She pressed the letter against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, though she did not know who she was thanking. When Leo came home from school, she showed him the letter. At first, he didn't understand. Then when she explained, his face lit up like fireworks. "Does that mean I can paint every day?" he asked. "Yes," she laughed through tears. "Every day." He jumped into her arms. That night, they celebrated with pizza and ice cream. It was simple, but it felt like a miracle. 2 days later, Laura took Leo to his favorite place, the city park with the large fountain. Leo loved sketching the water as it fell, trying to capture the light. Laura sat on a nearby bench, watching him draw. Her heart felt light. For once, she was not thinking about money, not thinking about survival, just enjoying the moment. Then she saw him, standing under a large oak tree. Gene Woo. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark trousers and a soft gray sweater. He looked normal, almost gentle. Her heart skipped. He began walking toward them. "I was nearby," he said simply. It was not a strong explanation, but she didn't question it. His eyes were on Leo. Laura stood. "Leo," she said softly, "this is my friend, Mr. Wu." Gene crouched down to Leo's level. "It's nice to meet you," he said calmly. Leo looked at him seriously. "I'm going to be a famous artist one day." Gene smiled, a real smile. "I believe you." Leo handed him the sketchbook. Gene studied the drawing carefully. "You draw the light," he said quietly. "Not just the fountain. That's rare." Leo beamed. Laura watched them. Something in her chest warmed deeply. This powerful man was speaking to her son with kindness. No ego, no pride, just respect. And that meant more than anything. From that day, Gene slowly became part of their routine. He never announced his visits. He simply appeared. At the park, at the small cafe near her apartment. Sometimes he brought Leo new sketch pencils. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy, just thoughtful. Laura noticed something important. He never tried to show off his wealth. He never offered her money. He never made her feel small. He respected her independence, and that made her trust him more. Gene, on the other hand, was experiencing something new. He had built his entire life on control. Meetings, security, power. But here, he stood in line for coffee. He listened to Leo talk about colors. He sat on park benches without bodyguards. It felt dangerous, but not in the way he was used to. It felt dangerous because he was lowering his guard, and he didn't know how to do that. One evening, they sat together watching the city skyline. Leo had fallen asleep at home with the babysitter. It was just the two of them. The lights of the city glittered below. Gene spoke quietly. "I used to think success meant building walls," he said. "The higher the walls, the safer you are." Laura listened. He continued. "But walls can become prisons." She didn't interrupt. She simply reached out and place her hand over his. It was a small gesture, but for Jean it felt enormous. He turned his hand and held hers. His fingers were warm, strong, steady. "My life is complicated," he said slowly. "That night at the restaurant, I wasn't really waiting for anyone." She nodded gently. "I guess." He looked at her, surprised. "You're not afraid?" She smiled softly. "I'm not a foolish woman, Jean. I know you're not ordinary, but I also know what I feel." "And what do you feel?" "That you are lonely." He didn't answer, because she was right. The silence between them felt full, not empty. He had spent years surrounded by people, but never truly seen, until her. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, his world continued. Meetings, deals, whispers, men who feared him. One of his closest advisors, Chun, noticed a change. "You've been distracted," Chun said one evening. Jean's eyes darkened slightly. "I handle everything." "Yes," Chun replied carefully. "But you leave early now. You cancel dinners." Jean said nothing. Chun lowered his voice. "Be careful. Attachment creates weakness." Jean's jaw tightened. Not everything is a weakness. Chun did not argue, but the warning remained in the air. A few days later, Laura received a phone call from the art program. They invited Leo to attend a small exhibition featuring selected scholarship students. It was a big opportunity. She told Jean about it during coffee. His eyes held quiet pride. "That's wonderful," he said. "You'll come?" she asked without thinking. There was a pause. His world did not mix with public events. But this was Leo. And her. "Yes," he said. "I'll be there." And for the first time in a very long time, Jean Woo felt something close to anticipation. Not for power, not for business, but for a child's painting on a gallery wall. That night, as Jean returned to his penthouse, he stood alone by the window. The city stretched below him, cold, bright, endless. He realized something important. He had always believed he controlled everything. But now, he wanted something he could not control. He wanted a simple life. Moments in the park, coffee shops, a small apartment with a child's drawing on the door. And that desire scared him more than any enemy ever had, because enemies could be defeated. But love made you vulnerable. And Jean Woo had never been vulnerable. Until now, the night of the exhibition arrived. Laura stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her hair. She wore a simple blue dress this time. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic. But she looked beautiful. Leo stood behind her, holding his sketchbook tightly. "Do you think people like my painting?" he asked. Laura turned and knelt in front of him. "I know they will," she said gently. "But even if they don't, what matters is that you love it." Leo nodded seriously. A few minutes later, they stepped into the small art gallery downtown. The room was bright. White walls, soft lights, paintings displayed neatly. Children and parents stood in small groups, whispering. Leo's painting hung on the far wall. It was a city skyline at night, but not dark. It was full of color. Purple skies, golden windows, blue light reflecting on water, hope inside darkness. Laura felt her throat tighten. She saw her son's heart on that wall. Then the room grew slightly quieter. People turned. Jean had entered. He wore a black suit again. Sharp, elegant, powerful. He did not belong in a small community gallery, but he walked calmly toward them. His eyes went directly to Leo's painting. He stood in front of it for a long moment. "You captured movement," he said quietly to Leo. "The city feels alive." Leo smiled proudly. Laura watched Jean carefully. Tonight, something felt different. He was more alert, more watchful. His eyes scanned the room often, as if expecting something. Across the gallery, two men stood near the entrance. They were not parents. They were not artists. They were watching Jean. One whispered to the other, "He's alone." The other nodded slowly. "We informed Mr. Han." Outside, black cars waited. Inside one of them sat Mr. Han, an older man with cold eyes. He had once been Jean's partner. Now he was his rival. Jean had built his empire carefully, but not everyone accepted his leadership. Mr. Han believed Jean was becoming soft, and softness in their world was dangerous. Han looked at the gallery building. So this is where he hides now, he muttered. Family places, art shows. He smiled without warmth. Interesting. Inside, Laura felt it too. A strange tension in the air. She leaned closer to Jean. Is everything all right? He met her eyes. For a second, he considered lying. But instead, he said quietly, My world is not simple, Laura. She held his gaze. I know. He studied her face. He wanted to tell her everything. But telling her the truth would pull her into danger. And that was the one thing he would never allow. Suddenly, Leo tugged on Lara's arm. Mom, they're announcing the scholarship speech. A small stage had been set up at the front of the room. The director of the program stepped forward. She spoke warmly about talent, about opportunity, about anonymous generosity. Then she called Leo's name. Lara's heart pounded. Leo walked up nervously. Jean stood very still. The director handed Leo a small certificate. Would you like to say something? She asked gently. Leo looked at the crowd, then at his mother, then, surprisingly, at Jean. Yes, Leo said into the microphone. I want to thank the person who helped me. Laura smiled proudly. Leo continued. I don't know who you are, but I promise I will paint something beautiful one day. For you. Jean's jaw tightened slightly. His chest felt heavy. He was not used to gratitude, not used to pure intentions, not used to being someone's silent hero. The room clapped warmly. But in the back corner, the two men were watching closely, recording, observing. Later that night, as the gallery emptied, Jean stepped outside to make a call. Double the security, he said quietly, discreetly. He ended the call. When he turned around, Mr. Han stood there, smiling. Well, Han said slowly, this is unexpected. Jean's expression became calm. Cold. What do you want? Han's eyes flicked toward the building. Art shows? Scholarships? Children? He stepped closer. You are forgetting who you are. I know exactly who I am, Jean replied evenly. Do you? Han's smile faded. Because your enemies are watching. Jean did not react, but his mind was sharp. Han leaned in slightly. Attachment creates weakness. The same words Chin had said earlier. Coincidence? No. Han's eyes hardened. If your enemies cannot hurt you, they will hurt what you love. Jean's entire body went still, deadly still. For the first time that evening, real danger entered the air. You will not touch them, Jean said quietly. Han shrugged. That depends on you. Then he walked away, leaving silence behind. Inside, Laura was helping Leo pack a sketchbook. When Jean returned, his expression was controlled. Too controlled. Is everything okay? She asked softly. Yes, he replied. But she knew it was not. The drive home was quieter than usual. He dropped them off, but he did not linger. He simply looked at her, long, almost memorizing her face. Be careful, he said softly. She frowned. From what? He did not answer. Just trust me. Then he left. That night, Jean stood in his office alone. The city lights glowed behind him. Chin entered quietly. Han approached you. It wasn't a question. Jean nodded once. Chen's voice was calm. He will test you. I know. Then you must choose. Jean turned slowly. Choose what? Power, Chen said quietly. Or peace. Jean looked back at the city. He had built everything with sacrifice, pain, control. But now, there was Laura and Leo. He saw Leo's painting in his mind. Light inside darkness. And he realized something important. If he stayed in this world fully, they would never be safe. But if he stepped away, he would lose control. And control was everything. Or at least, it used to be. Meanwhile, across the city, Laura lay awake in bed. Leo slept peacefully in the next room. She stared at the ceiling. She felt the shift tonight. The shadow behind Jean's eyes. The tension in his voice. She knew love was growing between them, but she also knew love sometimes walks into storms. And she did not know how strong that storm would be. In a dark car parked across the street from her building, a man watched apartment 3B. He spoke quietly into his phone. Yes, confirmed. This is where she lives. Silence. Then, we wait. And for the first time, the worlds of peace and power were no longer separate. They were moving toward collision. The next morning felt normal. Too normal. Sunlight entered Lara's small apartment. The smell of toast filled the kitchen. Leo sat at the table drawing while eating cereal. But Lara felt uneasy, like something invisible had shifted. She checked the door lock twice before leaving for work. She didn't know why. She just did. Across the city, Gene had not slept. He sat in his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, files were spread across his desk. Security reports, surveillance updates. Mr. Han had already started applying pressure. Small disruptions in shipments, quiet threats whispered through mutual contacts. Nothing obvious, nothing loud. But it was building. Chin stood near the window. You cannot ignore this, Chin said calmly. I'm not ignoring it, Gene replied. You are hesitating. Gene's jaw tightened. I am calculating. Chin studied him carefully. For years, you were untouchable, because you had nothing to lose. Silence. That is no longer true. The words hung heavy in the air. Gene stood slowly. I will handle Han. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. If you choose the wrong method, they will suffer. Gene did not answer, but inside, he had already made a decision. That afternoon, Lara noticed something strange. A black car parked across the street. It had been there yesterday, too. She told herself she was imagining things. But when she walked Leo home from school, the car was still there. Her heart beat faster. She looked again. The windows were tinted. She couldn't see inside. She forced herself to stay calm for Leo. Mom, Leo asked. Yes, sweetheart. Why are you squeezing my hand so tight? She relaxed immediately. Sorry, just thinking. But she was not just thinking. She was afraid. That evening, Gene arrived at her apartment. Not casually, not relaxed, alert, focused. He saw it immediately. The car. His expression darkened. He walked Lara and Leo inside quickly. Pack a small bag, he said quietly. Lara stared at him. What? Just essentials. For you and Leo. Gene, what is happening? His voice softened slightly. I need you to trust me. She searched his eyes. There was no deception, only urgency. She nodded. Within 10 minutes. She had a small backpack ready. Leo looked confused. Are we going somewhere? Yes, Gene answered gently. An adventure. Leo brightened slightly. Like a secret mission? Gene allowed a small smile. Yes, exactly. Downstairs, Gene made a call. Activate safe location 3. He said firmly, no delays. The black car across the street started its engine, but before it could move, 2 SUVs blocked its path. Men stepped out. Quiet, efficient. The black car reversed and sped away. Gene watched carefully. His world had officially reached your door, and that meant he had waited too long. They drove out of the city, far from downtown, far from the noise. Lara sat in the back with Leo, holding him close. She looked at Gene through the mirror. Tell me the truth. He hesitated. Then he spoke clearly. I have enemies. I guess that much. They use leverage. Her stomach dropped. And we are leverage. Yes. He did not lie. She closed her eyes for a moment. Fear rose inside her. But something else rose too. Anger. You said you would protect us. I will. You should have told me earlier. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. You would have walked away. She didn't answer, because he was right. They arrived at a large house outside the city. Private, secure, guards positioned quietly around the property. Lara stepped out slowly. This is your world, she said softly. Yes. She looked at him. You said walls can become prisons. They can. And now you have placed us inside one. The words hit him hard, because they were true. That night, Leo slept in a large, unfamiliar bedroom. Lara stood on the balcony alone. Gene joined her quietly. The countryside stretched into darkness. I never wanted this for you, he said. She looked at him. I didn't choose this life. I know. Silence. I can end this, he said finally. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I can remove Han. The words were calm, cold, final. Laura understood immediately. You mean kill him? He did not respond. That was answer enough. She stepped back slightly. That is your solution? He threatens you. And you think blood will fix that? His voice hardened slightly. In my world, yes. She shook her head. No, Jean, that is why your world never changes. He looked at her intensely. If I do nothing, they will keep coming. She stepped closer now. You once told me walls are prisons. Yes. And violence builds thicker walls. Silence. Her eyes filled slightly. I don't want to love a man who solves fear with death. The words cut deeper than any weapon. He turned away. His entire life had been built on decisive force. But now, he was facing something stronger than power. Her moral line, her boundary, and he realized if he crossed it, he would lose her forever. Later that night, Jean stood alone in the security room, watching camera feeds, thinking. Han wanted a reaction, a violent one, because violence would justify retaliation, endless war, endless cycle. But if Jean stepped back, if he shifted power instead of striking, it would be risky, dangerous, but different. Chin entered quietly. You called? Jean nodded slowly. I will not escalate. Chin stared at him. That is weakness. No, Jean replied calmly. It is control. Chin studied him. This is about her. Yes. And the boy. Yes. Chin exhaled slowly. You are changing. Jean looked at the monitors. Maybe I am finally choosing. The next morning, news spread quietly through their network. Jean Woo had frozen several shared investments with Han, cutting funding lines, blocking financial channels, legal pressure, strategic moves, not violence. Han was furious. You think business tricks will stop me? He snapped in a private call. Jean's voice was steady. You want war. I will give you isolation. You're protecting them, Han hissed. Yes. Han laughed darkly. Love makes men stupid. Jean answered softly. No, it makes them careful. At the safe house, Laura noticed something. The guards were still there, but Jean seemed calmer, less sharp, less aggressive. He sat at the kitchen table, while Leo drew pictures. Mr. Wu, Leo said seriously, if bad guys come, will you fight them? Jean looked at him. I will make sure they never reach you. Leo nodded, satisfied. Laura watched this exchange quietly. She walked over and placed her hand gently over Jean's. You chose not to kill him, she said softly. He looked at her. Yes. Why? Because you would not look at me the same again. Her eyes softened. You are stronger than you think. He shook his head slightly. No, you are. Outside, the storm was still building. But inside that guarded house, something more powerful than fear was growing. Choice, restraint, transformation. And for the first time, Jean Woo was not fighting to win. He was fighting to become better. The days at the safe house felt strange. Quiet, too quiet. Laura tried to keep things normal for Leo. Homework at the kitchen table. Drawing time in the afternoon. Stories before bed. But she knew this was not their real life. It was borrowed safety. And borrowed safety never lasts forever. Jean worked from a temporary office inside the house. Calls, meetings, strategy, but no violence, no revenge. He had chosen a different path. And that path was harder. Across the city, Mr. Han was losing control. Jean's financial moves were precise. Legal investigations had quietly started. Partnerships were dissolving. Han's allies began stepping away, not because they liked Jean, but because stability always wins over chaos. Han wanted war, but Jean refused to fight that way. And without a visible enemy, Han looked reckless. Desperate, alone. One evening, Chin entered Jean's office. It's working, Chin said. Han's investors are withdrawing. Jean nodded slowly. And he's leaving the city. Silence. Jean leaned back in his chair. Not victorious. Not proud. Just tired. It's over, he asked quietly. For now, Chen replied. Chen studied him carefully. You could have ended him permanently. I know. And yet you didn't. Jean looked toward the window where Laura and Leo were laughing outside in the yard. I chose something else. Chen gave a small nod. Then he said something unexpected. You were always powerful. Now you are dangerous in a different way. Jean raised an eyebrow slightly. How? You no longer act from ego. Chen left the room, and Jean sat alone, thinking. For the first time in his life, he had won without destroying, and it felt different, better. A week later, it was safe to return. The guards were reduced. Surveillance reports were quiet. Laura stood in the living room with her packed bag. Is it really over? She asked softly. For now, Jean answered honestly. She nodded. She respected honesty, even when it was uncertain. When they returned to apartment 3B, it felt smaller than before, but warmer. Leo ran to the door and smiled at his son, drawing still tape to it. Home, he said happily. Jean stood behind them. He had been in penthouses, mansions, private compounds. But this small hallway felt more meaningful than all of them. Inside, Laura turned to him. You don't belong here, she said gently. He studied her face. Do you want me to leave? She stepped closer. I want you to decide who you are. Silence filled the small apartment. Not heavy, just honest. I built my life one way, Jean said slowly. Fear, control, power. She waited. But that life nearly cost me you. Her eyes softened. And Leo, he swallowed slightly. I don't know how to be normal. She gave a small smile. Neither do I. He almost laughed. For the first time, truly relaxed. The next few months were not dramatic. There were no gunfights, no loud endings, just slow change. Jean stepped back from daily operations. He restructured leadership. Turned more investments into legitimate ventures. Charity programs expanded. Education funds. Art foundations. He began attending Leo's art classes quietly. Not as a boss. Not as a protector. But as someone present. At first, people whispered about him. A powerful man changing direction. But power shifts in many ways. And soon, his empire looked different. Cleaner. Less violent. More controlled by systems instead of fear. One afternoon, Leo had his first real exhibition. Not just a student event, a public one. His painting hung proudly in a small downtown gallery. It was called Light After Storm. The skyline again, but brighter this time. More open, more hopeful. Laura stood beside Jean as visitors admired Leo's work. You see, she whispered, he always paints light. Jean nodded slowly. Yes. And you? She asked gently. Are you still living in darkness? He looked at the painting, then at her. No. He reached for her hand. Not urgently, not desperately, just naturally. I am learning. Later that night, back at the apartment, Leo was asleep. Laura and Jean sat on the couch quietly. No tension, no fear, just calm. You never told me, she said softly. Told you what? About the scholarship. He paused. She watched his reaction carefully. I suspected, she added. You speak about Leo's art like someone who knew before. He looked down briefly. I wanted it to stay anonymous. Why? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. She smiled gently. I never felt small with you. He exhaled slowly. That matters. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You changed, she said quietly. I chose, he corrected. Yes. Silence again. Comfortable silence. The kind that once felt impossible to him. Weeks later, Jean stood alone on the same rooftop where he once confessed about walls and prisons. The city stretched below, but it did not feel cold anymore. He had not destroyed his empire. He had transformed it. He had not lost power. He had redefined it. Real power was not fear. It was restraint, not control over others, but control over yourself. He heard footsteps behind him. Laura joined him. Thinking? She asked. Yes. About what? About that night in the restaurant. She smiled softly. You looked very serious. I was empty. And now... He turned to her. I am full. She stepped closer. You saved me, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, you saved yourself. I only reminded you who you could be. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her gently. Not dramatic, not desperate, just certain. Months later, Leo ran toward them in the park. Look, he shouted, holding up a new painting. It showed 3 figures standing under a bright sun. A small boy, a woman, and a tall man beside them, all facing forward. Together. What's it called? Jean asked. Leo grinned. Sanctuary. Jean felt his throat tighten slightly, because he understood now. Sanctuary was not a building, not a fortress, not a guarded estate. It was people. It was choice. It was love. And for the first time in his life, Jean Wu was not protecting a kingdom. He was protecting a family, not with fear, but with presence.